Hi, I'm Edric,
I'm Joy.
and we're here to help you.
Get it right from the start.
So, what we want to help people get right from the start or get right starting now is something we've learned and has been very powerful for our family. It's the rite of passage. So, I know that way back when you had some of your own research that you put together, and I got my inspiration from other speakers actually. So, let's hear your origin story so we can share it to everyone listening and understand why it's so relevant. And then we can talk about things we've learned and how to do it, practically speaking.
Yeah, because at the time we only had sons. Remember, we had three sons. I'm asking you, like, remember, but of course you know this.
I think so. Don't assume. Don't
And
assume
so,
I can remember.
since we didn't have daughters, I was always reading books about what it takes to raise boys. And I remember one of the books I read was called Raising a Modern Day Knight. I forget the author now, I'm sorry. But in that book, it was very particular about having a rite of passage from childhood to manhood. But even studies today show that it's very important to signal transitions in a child's life, especially going into adulthood. Because the term teenager actually is a modern day term that didn't exist in the past. But when you say teenager versus a young adult, it's like you're saying that you can stay in this limbo period when you're not a child anymore, but not yet quite an adult. And it's like, what do you do in that period? So we always addressed our kids as soon as they turned 13, we would tell them, you're now a young adult,
Yeah.
right? So as you did also your own research by meeting with mentors and people like Cassie Karstens, you had your own realizations, which is why you create some rites of passage for our children.
Yeah, and I want to be accurate in the inspiration behind doing this. It wasn't just Cassie Karstens, who's the mover behind The World Needs a Father, where he talked about stages. And I think it was he who talked about even in tribes, they do this so that even at that very base societal relationship, there is a mark for the boys who now become men. So it's almost natural for societies to have these things so that they can carry on, right? That's one inspiration. The other is a book from Alex and Brett Harris, 200 Things.
Oh yeah.
So that was really, really good because they talked about how many young people are able to do great things when they don't think about this modern day concept of teenager, which really is, if you look at the Bible, there was no such thing as that. And you look at many of even the founding fathers of America through that season, there were many boys who became men and did great things in their teenage years because there was no such thing as the teenage years which we hear of now, which stereotypically is the season where they could figure out what they want to do. So there's all sorts of reckless things and they're figuring out life when that is not biblical. So Dad, it's Pastor Peter, Dad, who's actually reminded me of how there is none of that term. So putting all of those sources together, we decided to do it for our family early on. And I think I'll share the first one.
Yeah, sure.
If that's all right. I was trying to figure out the best way to do this with our son Elijah since he was our first. And because there was no experience, with just pure inspiration, we said, what can we do for Elijah as he hits 13, the teen year? So he's no longer a boy, but he's now a young man or a young adult in the words you used earlier. And what does that mean practically? So what we decided to do was, and with the help of my father, who's very much big on these, man building moments, if you will, he said, do something that will stretch him outside of his comfort zone, that will allow him to feel a sense of accomplishment because he stretched himself beyond what he thought were his limits. And so I decided to take him on a climb to the tallest mountain in the Philippines I got my buddy Jesse Tan, who's a outdoorsy guy, and he was able to connect us to the first Filipino to climb Mount Everest. So his name is Pastor Imata. So this gentleman, Pastor Imata, designed a route for us to take 4 days, 3 nights, all the way up to Mount Apos summit and then back down. Now, Elijah and I were not mountain climbers. We had gone on a couple of hikes. So, cut the story short, what made it very special as a rite of passage is we had to climb 4 days, 3 nights, but we had to do it with very basic supplies. So he had to learn everything from climbing boulders, going through sulfuric spews, and then cutting the throat of a chicken so we might have food to eat on the mountain, and withstanding the very cold periods of that time, and then the really hot season, and going to all that. And the culminating moment of the whole rite of passage is when I, as a father, will write him a letter to say what it means to be a man and to welcome him into the world of men. And I asked the closest men in his life and my life to do the same, which meant my father, my father-in-law, my brothers-in-law, right? And then the men that I was also discipling at that time, who were also really good kind of titos to my son Elijah. So after the whole thing, when we finally did it, and he was reading the cards, I remembered how emotional he also got, and how from that point there was a different confidence, a different pep in Elijah's step, because he then understood what it meant to be a man, and he was able to feel the relief of being able to overcome that whole thing and survive. And the funny thing is, and you'll hear this from me, the rite of passage for my son is in many ways a rite of passage for me too, because I'm able to stretch myself and see things that I'm able to do. So at the end of this, I was super exhausted. I was like spent, and I just like, Dad, are you okay? He was the one now looking to make sure that I was okay. So very fun memory, even as I experienced that with him.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that if you look at because you mentioned U.S. culture, but I think culturally speaking, around the world, there'd be these ceremonies, right? That you would get together as a community and usher in um, children
I mentioned
into
tribal,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
from
yes,
Cassie Carson's
and it would
South
have to be.
African experience.
But the problem is today, many of those rituals are lost, and they're so in modern societies where the transitions are now ambiguous, kids actually struggle with recognizing when they should take on more responsibility because they're not sure, am I a child, am I an adult? And I remember that Elijah really did significantly change after that moment. And there's an author, Angela Duckworth, when she talked about grit, she said when there's a rite of passage, it has to be something that shows overcoming a very difficult experience, something that pushes you out of your comfort zone. So I remember when you were playing this rite of passage, I was a little bit concerned because I knew you both weren't seasoned climbers. But here you were going to take in for this and I know you don't cook your own food for sure. But somehow
I eat my own food.
you cook the food that I prepare for you. But so when you came back from that, I was just so impressed to see how Elijah survived, but also you actually, and having that moment together as father and son, and how you involved other men into the picture, I think was just so meaningful for him. He wrote a very long essay after that for his homeschooling about the entire experience. And so I'm just so grateful, looking back that you initiated that, because something like that, when it comes to initiating boys into manhood, it really should be the men in the boy's life, right? If it's us organizing it as a women, it doesn't have the same effect. But also, so how these activities, these events, these transitional events create a sense of belonging and identity. And I remember when our third son, Titus, do you remember how when he had to do that bike run, because it was during the pandemic, so we couldn't do a hike or a climb or anything like that. So Edric had to come up with something where he would push himself really hard, and then all of a sudden now he would belong to now have that identify now with his dad and his older brothers, right? And he even exceeded what you guys were able to do. Could you share a little bit about that
So
story?
what I find very interesting about these rite of passages, you have objective A in mind, but God has a way of adding B and C, and it becomes so much more rich and memorable. So for Titus, what happened was pandemic, we couldn't climb mountains. So with my first two was mountains. The third one, there was no mountain because all the pandemic protocols. So we decided to do a really long bike ride, which we don't normally do. What's it, 60K? Somewhere
But it
around
was
the
up and
Subic
down.
area, up and down the mountain and through the hill mountain because we couldn't climb mountains. But to Joy's point, it was me and my two older boys who were much bigger and stronger than Titus. Titus was kind of scrawny and kind of getting his way or becoming his own man. So we started biking, and he wasn't really much of a biker. But the surprising thing was, he outlasted us all. I started to gas out. My son's bike broke down. So me in the car now because I gassed out, and my second son whose bike broke down were in the car, and the third son, the first son, Elijah, after a while was like, all right, you know what? Let's just go on. And Titus was the lone ranger, who I said, you know what, Titus, we're all in the car. We can be done, and let's now go
'Cause you
and
were
get to our place because
exhausted.
we were all exhausted. But he's like, no, Dad, I set out to start this. I'm going to finish it.
Yeah.
And so he did. And that's part of what we celebrated. It wasn't so much he's able to overcome and all the letters which we did, but it was that statement of Titus that encouraged me, that made me realize that another objective was achieved, where he reminded himself that we are supposed to finish the thing we are started no matter what it takes, even if there is an opportunity to exit already, like what happened to all of us, right?
Because-
so that was
yeah.
super memorable for me.
And think of emotionally and psychologically how he must have been affected, because here they are, okay, they're in a van beside Titus, who's biking, right? And here you are now relaxing
In the aircon.
in the air conditioning. It was so hot,
With
right?
all the water,
And Titus is continuing to do the bike through the different
ups and downs.
ups and downs, and you guys basically followed him, instead of going ahead of him. But just, I think, him probably thinking that there's an exit, it's right there, I could take that at any time. But him pushing himself was I think what made this occasion, this rite of passage, so momentous. Yeah.
I have one more story for the other son, right? So I wanted to be able to articulate this as well, because I talked about how, so we're giving you tips on rite of passages, what works, but the added insights that God provides as you go through this with Eden. When we did the rite of passage, it was one of the tallest mountains in Taiwan. So we went with a couple of buddies, with Jesse again, my buddy. This was before pandemic. And as we went to the mountain, honestly, the mountain hike was uneventful. We got up, got down, did the letters. It was good. Eden had a good time. It was very, very cold, much colder than Apple. But what made it memorable is after that hike, or the climb rather, and we finished it, we then did a side tour in one of these islands off Taiwan, where they had these beautiful sandstone formations. And during this tour, the boys started to be with each other, or the young men, if you will, and us dads were hanging out with each other. And as it started to rain, the park started to warn everybody to stay away from the sandstone sculptures and to head back into the shelter, because when it rains, the waves get stronger and it basically spills over to the sandstone and it's unsafe. In fact, there was a statue of a fisherman, and I'll build up to that in a little bit. So the rains are coming. They notify us in English, please stay away. And then they say it in Mandarin also for the local guests. So the dads are huddling into the shelter, and I see all the boys, the young men coming in, and I noticed Eden wasn't there. So I said, hey guys, where is Eden? I thought he was with you taking photos. And they're like, oh no, he went off on his own to take photos and we don't know where he is. So I asked the dads who were with me, and they said, we didn't see him. So my heart started to race, because here we are in a foreign country. It's starting to rain. The waters are coming in, and they're notifying everybody to stay away from the sand sculpture. So I'm like, where's my son Eden? And I start looking for him. And then I see that statue I mentioned, which is on a kind of a lookout spot. I went to the statue and I tried to see him. I could not see Eden. I saw everybody pretty much moving to the shelters, except the lifeguards, if you will, on their stations. And then that statue was the picture of a fisherman who had attempted to rescue a young boy who had fallen into the water surrounding, and they both died. So I was like, this is not a good statue to see as I'm looking for my son. So I'm looking and I'm starting to pray. I'm like, dear God, please do not let this be the story of the rite of passage that I lose my son because I did not watch over him, right? I do not know what I'm even going to say to my wife if I come back. So all of these things were playing in my mind. And I said, Lord, if only I could hear his voice. If only there was a way for me to connect with him, supernaturally. And I said, please show me mercy. I am so sorry. I will be more mindful. I will be a better dad. I was saying all of these things in my heart. And honestly, I was starting to tear up because I started imagining what would this be like if I lose my son? And what's interesting is as I was praying and closing my eyes, I heard a voice tapping on the microphone, tap, tap, tap. Something that sounded like Mandarin. And then, Daddy, Daddy, this is Eden. And I was like, I opened my eyes and I'm like, it's really him. If you hear this, I am at the main station, at the
Welcome.
at the main reception area. Please come get me here. Thanks, Daddy. I love you. And then the PA goes off and I'm like, okay, I know where that is. And so I made a beeline. I went there and, my heart was racing. I was like, God, thank you. And I saw him and, he's rite of passage. He's trying to be a man. He's trying to be tough. So he looks at me. Initially, he looks at me and then he hugs me and he starts to cry. And I embraced him and I said, son, I'm so glad I found you. And I'm so sorry that Daddy missed where you were. And there's no excuse. So I asked him, then I said, Eden, how did you find a way to contact Daddy? And this is why I say that God has a way of adding these other objectives. I think the real rite of passage for Eden was for me to repent and realize how I should always be mindful, not make assumptions, but to encourage me that God in his sovereignty is able to do things in our kids that only he can do. So what he allowed Eden to do was Eden was able to take my phone, because that's what he was using for photos, and he was able to download a translator app.
He didn't download it actually.
Or sorry, he saw
said
that there was a
there was a
translator app.
app,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so with the translator app on his phone, he started speaking to it and asking the guides how he would find his father because he was lost. And so it would translate it, and they told him to go to that center, and it was through that same app that he was able to talk to the receptionist and get the PA and call my name out. And so I share that because of all those. I think that became very memorable for me because I could have messed up big time there. And God redeemed the whole thing and reminded me that, Edric, you do your parts, you create these things, but at the end of the day, I am the one who will care for your children. I am the one that has full control of all of their lives, right? And I'm the one who will give them even these added learnings of presence of mind and all these things. So I just thought I'd share that because, again, our whole emphasis is on what we will do to create these experiences for our children to realize what it means to be a man, at least for the men, and then move into that zone. But there's so much that God does into us also as we create these experiences, and many reminders that ultimately that God is in control of their lives and their futures.
Yeah, so I think, for the rite of passage ceremony, I think to kind of summarize what it is and how to do it, it has to be something memorable and will stretch them, especially for the boys.
And may stretch you, like it's happened in many ways.
But secondly, to also involve community, right? And to actually tell them, because I remember you've told me this story several times, but your father was very specific in telling you,
yes, that's right,
as you would transition to different milestones in your own growing up years.
Yeah.
He would even give you a gift each
Symbolic.
time to symbolize that transition. And so it's also something concrete, like they have something concrete as a reference point. Did you want to share about that as we close?
Yeah, so I did those for my sons. I gave them these tokens and the letters to make it meaningful, right? But my father would do that at critical junctures when I became a teenager. So this was graduating elementary. He did something symbolic. He gave me a razor. He gave me my first acne cream, and he gave spiritual metaphors to each of those. And then when I graduated from college, he did the same. And when I was about to get married, the one that's most recent and of all those milestones was when I was about to get married, literally the day before the wedding, or kind of when I saw the family before I went to the ceremony of our wedding, he said to me, "Son, I'm letting you go." And that for me was a big shock. And when I first heard it, I actually broke down and understand what that meant. And he hugged me. And then he looked at me in the eyes. He said, "You're now your own man. You will take care of your family. You'll be responsible for them. And that's why I'm letting you go in that sense." And it's very biblical. "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother." So he kind of echoed that to me. And that moment is still very vivid. I remember this facial expression. I remember the feeling in my heart and my mind and his embrace, right? So that's what I recall, and I think Joy was alluding to in my own life. It has been helpful for me to look back these man building moments, these clear junctures, and how as parents we want to be able to mark them with our children so that they understand the responsibilities that come with the next stage, and they're able to own up to it and live up to it, if you will, as well. So
Yeah.
that's it, right? So if you have not done it, find out how. Now for the girls, we're going into that
Yeah.
because our girls are still going through that stage, and we're gonna talk more about that as we discover how you will be able to do it.
It will be different for the women because it's not so much about physical strength and maybe surviving the wilderness.
Right.
But I'm trying to brainstorm something that will affirm like womanly
You're
characteristics.
not a girl anymore, but you're
Yeah,
right now
yeah.
and a woman also, and what it means to be
And to be
a woman.
surrounded also by other women who will come alongside her and be mentors.
Right.
to our-
Because who else will tell you that you are a man or a woman? And we'd like to think biblically, you will be the one to help explain that to your children. And these milestones are the ones that can do it. So hope that that's helpful for all of you. Once again, it is our deep passion. I'm Edric,
I'm Joy.
our deep passion to help you
Get it right from the start.